Okay, everyone, welcome back. Last subtopic on illumination of the workplace, topic 3. So this is about workplace design, human space design in order to support human vision. So designing for proper illumination. All right, so how much light? We remember when we talked about in the vision topic, and we had examples of, the why contrast needs lights and darks to be able to distinguish them. And you can get lights and darks with more light, but at a certain point, you can get oversaturated and you no longer have the lights and the darks anymore. So you don't want too little light. And this would be, like a lot of common restaurants. We don't have our relevant receptors activated. It's hard to read menus or whatever. And we don't want too much light. Not only can things get washed out, but then we can have glare problems. And when I go like this, I'm talking about my reaction to glare, which is usually painful and or debilitating light that is scattered across the retina, and it interferes with our basic intended visual processing. Okay, so in each case, too little or too much, we don't have the contrast we need. We don't get the darks and the lights. And this causes visual fatigue. It adds extra strain on the eyes to be able to make those distinctions. All right, now I believe this is our first time using a very useful, freely available human factors standard, the military standard 1472H. I've been teaching this class long enough that I remember when it was 1472B and C. And I used those in the first versions of this class. And so it's, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. It's that many iterations. I think this latest one was released in 2019. So it's fairly recent as of this recording. And you have access to it. So I've linked it on Canvas here. So it's this link right here. And table 21 XXI is going to be something you'll need to use for your homework. And it's also a pretty nice informational sort of a table here. So this is going to give us, so remember in the previous subtopics, we calculated actually in 3.2 Lambert's law, we talked about illuminance on a surface and how much light do we need to strike that surface to be able to do certain work tasks. And so I could get my photometer, put it right there in the center of the desk, see what the lights in the room are giving me, and determine, do I have enough light here to, according to the military, to do a good job, in this type of work. So we actually have a couple of things here. So you can see all the different types of work that they've outlined. This is, by the way, on pages 160 and 161. So it's like a 450-page document. So you might shortcut to it. And you can kind of see, there's different levels. There's a minimum level and there's a preferred level. I'll usually ask about the minimum level because it's easy to say, well, I prefer that, but what is the amount you need to be able to do the job effectively? That'll be your minimum. I want to point this out. Don't get overlook that we have lux and foot candles represented here, and they use lux as the first variable. Don't get those mixed up because I will ask about foot candles. So you're going to want to know, you're going to want to know the value in parentheses. So for example, if I asked you, what is the minimum illuminance required or illumination required to inspect or to repair missiles? It is 50 foot candles. That's this one, or 540 lux. So again, don't overlook that. And sometimes, actually kind of commonly students do overlook that. So that's why I pointed out. All right. Good. Now glare, when there's too much light or the light is not being projected at the right angle or level for a good human visual experience. And we have different types of glare that we'll talk about. So direct glare, this is when you stare directly into a light source. And this is when you have damage to the retina due to the high energy content of the light, very higher lumens. This is essentially electromagnetic radiation, also what heat is. laser beams are electromagnetic radiation. So if you get enough energy in those, they can be damaging to these cells. More often, because usually we don't look directly into light sources if we can help it, it's reflected off of something and then, and then disrupts our vision. So reflected glare it typically has a lot of different properties based on how the light spreads in the reflection. So a diffusing sort of pattern. This is actually kind of a design feature a lot of times, because if you want a nice, soft, distributed light, if you have a surface that diffuses like this, it can be very nice. And I'll show you some examples here. Good. Yeah, a polished surface is going to be like a mirror, right? So, you can look in the reflection on your cell phone and, see something. That'll be specular glare if the sun shines off of your phone into your eye. Yes, and then diffuse if it's more of a matte surface. And diffuse is also a good way if you have a surface that is matte like this, so that it diffuses the reflected light. It's generally a good design feature for something you need to look at. It controls kind of the nature of the light in the environment. This is a good example here. Apple MacBook. This is several years ago now, but there was a model that came out which was so polished, so beautiful, shiny, and new. And the surface that they used on the, right here, this surface was just too shiny. It was too polished. You end up having this specular glare. And so I don't know if this has, affected any of you in the past. I can't see my laptop when I'm typing in, in the library or in the Zachary building or whatever. And so what we saw in later models, and in this common practice now today, I think in most laptops, is there's more of a matte sort of surface here. So you can see how the light is diffusely reflected in this case. So each case we're talking about glare, but in one case it's probably a lot more severe in terms of limiting what we're processing. Okay, so reflected glare, direct glare, those are based on where the light is getting to your eyes from. But now we can talk functionally, what does it do? So disability glare, this is when we tend to have, a uncontrolled, usually very bright sort of, light wave that strikes our eye. Best example I can relate to is when you have a really shiny magazine and you turn the page and there's that you can see them already here, these very bright flashes that occur as the magazine is moved relative to the light sources. And what this does is it's disability because it makes it hard to see some of the details you're trying to see. It effectively messes extremely with the contrast in the lights and the darks. What's my foreground versus what's my background? It really messes that up. And then we have discomfort glare, and this is where we actually squint and feel pain. So I typically wouldn't have that, if I just turn a magazine page. I may not be able to read what just flashed around me, but I'm not going, ooh, that hurt my eyes or something like this. So discomfort glare is when we actually have, pain, or we have basically our eyes trying to adapt at a rate that causes, an additional level of tension in the muscles of the eye that we can feel. Discomfort glare is hard to quantify. It's something that, everybody experiences differently. But you can feel this, anytime you go like this, right? So I'm looking sunrise, sunset, I'm trying to see, and the sun's low on the horizon while I'm driving, for example. Very good example. And we can have both of these, right? You can have a glare source that both limits your ability to see what you were trying to see and is, discomforting, is causing you discomfort. But they're two functionally different aspects of glare. Okay. Oh, good. Yes. So we talked earlier about clear versus frosted bulbs when we talked about the 5 times rule in regard to 3.2 Lambert's law. And I talked about how, well, if I see this clear bulb, the dimension of interest is actually the filament itself, right? So this, if I'm doing the 5 times rule, I've got the 1-inch filament here, versus for the frosted bulb, the dimension of the light source is the entire diameter of the bulb, because there isn't like one, you can't see the internal element. Basically, it's the light is diffused in a way that this entire bulb acts as a light source. And so this has benefits of taking that luminous flux, that light energy, and diffusing it in a way that spreads that light a little more evenly. And that's why if you're staring directly into an unshielded, a clear bulb, it's more discomfort glare you're going to get than if it's a frosted bulb. It does a better job of taking the light energy that's at the filament and diffusing it in a way that makes it softer, basically, for whatever perspective, whatever angle you're viewing it. All right, so common theme in this course is that all humans age until they don't age anymore because they're dead. And so all of us will have, in the best case, to look forward to our bodies falling apart. And this happens to all of us. It's happening to all of us right now. We are already degraded from when we were, young, healthy, flexible young people. Okay, so and we talked about presbyopia, and we talked about how that's partially related to the lens itself becoming less transmissive of light. So now we know what that means, transmittance. Remember the T constant from 3.3. So that constant becomes, for the lens itself, the changing shape that assists in refraction in the eye. That gets thicker, more opaque, lets less light pass through. And this is kind of a surprising value, but it's only about 20 to 30% of the light in a healthy young person reaches the retina of an elderly person. I don't know exactly what the ages are for the older operator. So in addition to things like presbyopia, where we can't resolve things so well, effectively you're getting less light to the retina. And so typically as we age, you need more illumination around you in order to be able to see more clearly. So yeah, in general, the eye becomes a cloudy mess as we age, and it's harder for light to get to the retina. Another issue is that as we age, again, partially due to presbyopia, more older people have glasses than younger people. And so if you're wearing eyewear, this is also lots of different sharp angles for light to be reflected off of in chaotic ways. So more light scattering can be more disability glare. So harder to drive, especially at night. And so sometimes you hear, if any of you have, elderly loved ones, and there becomes the conversation of, can these folks still drive? Our eyes, our decision making, our reaction time, all of these things slow down or make it harder to drive. And all of them are factors we have to consider in what is a safe driving context. And so a lot of times as people, reach really extreme ages where they're, still trying to have valid driver's license, sometimes there may be limitations for nighttime driving. And it's not because, older people are afraid of the dark or something. It's because, especially with older eyes, there are major problems with disability glare, especially at nighttime. Okay. All right, so let's talk about, so glare is a problem. We don't like it. We want to design a workplace that minimizes it, okay? But we also need to get enough illumination. So if we put our photometer on our desk, we know we're getting the 50-foot candles needed to do our missile repair, right? So we can talk about, well, here's my space, and you can look around your own space right now, and you may have control over that space. You could think, maybe after this lecture, I'll go out and buy a desk lamp because Ferris told me why that's a good idea. So there's a lot of different ways, you can illuminate a space, and there are more cost-effective ways than others. There are also more human eye effective ways to illuminate your space. Okay, so the different types, we'll say direct versus indirect. Direct lighting is the light bulb is basically available for me to stare directly at it. Okay, so the light is projected directly onto the objects that need to be seen. Yeah, if you have a incandescent light on the ceiling and it's pointed down, that's it. Indirect lighting, and actually, if I was in my office luminaire, that's the structure that emits the light, is this type. It's indirect lighting. So it actually emits the majority of the light upwards into the ceiling area, and the ceiling, because we've painted it white, we've painted it with we've covered the ceiling with a reflective material, a material that has a high R reflectivity constant. And so most of that light is then reflected off of a ceiling. And when it does that, we get more of this sort of a matte distribution of the light. And so because it's usually a painted structure, and that's a nice, pleasant way to illuminate a space, basically. So it's not you're not getting as many lumens on the thing that you're trying to look at with indirect lighting, because ultimately anytime light hits a surface, some of that energy is absorbed. So you're not getting the same amount as you would with direct lighting, but it's a softer, more context, like the entire context can be taken into account a little more readily. So indirect lighting is generally a little bit of a better sort of whole room illuminating sort of method. Whereas if I need fine detail on something, get a desk lamp and point it straight down, like right on top of your desk. And if I've got an illuminating source here just a foot or 2 feet above the object I'm looking at, we know from Lambert's law that smaller distance between the light source and the object I'm viewing increases that effective illumination. So I can put that desk lamp right here so that my eyes are not being, affected by glare from it, but I can really illuminate the thing I'm trying to look at, down on my desk. And I can do it with relatively little electrical energy compared to if I made it that bright in the entire room with the direct lighting on the ceiling. So yeah, here's our recommendation, usually a mix of the two again. And so here's my desk lamp example. That's better than me going like this, I guess. But yeah, typically you want more indirect light than you do want direct light. Direct light is more of a situational thing, I think. So get the lamp out when you need it, right? There we go. Okay. Okay, now sources of light. Where do we go? To the light store, right? So most of the light I'm enjoying in this room here today comes from the soul, the Mr. Sun. And so, that's free. We don't have to pay electricity rates for that. Windows and skylights provide it. Great source, very green energy source, very green light source, right? Now we have to also think about, though, that the sun is an uncontrolled illumination source. We have issues of glare depending on the position, and so we also have to think about that. So if we're indoor, we're using artificial methods, and we're beyond the candle days. So this is interesting because you can kind of follow the technological advances in televisions, LCD, LED, this has all happened in the last 10, 20 years, where it's been huge advances in the electrical efficiency, the energy efficiency of some of these light producing items. So LEDs right now are incredibly efficient in terms of how much electrical energy goes in and how much lumens of light energy come out. But most other sources that you think of as light bulbs and things are not very efficient. And so what you see, an incandescent lamp, that's like a bulb, you can see the little metal filament there. I am going to apply 1 watt of energy, of electrical energy, and I'll get maybe 5 to 20 lumens, and compare that with much higher luminous flux values for some of these other technologies. So, LEDs, much, much more efficient. So, but energy isn't created or destroyed. So what happens is we typically have most of the energy in these lower efficiency light sources turns into heat. In fact, what I'd heard before is 80% or something like that of the energy that goes into an incandescent bulb is emitted as heat instead of in the visible light spectrum. So we want more visible light so that we can use it for illumination, right? All right, so a couple examples here. A CFL, this would be like those twisty bulbs that you can get to replace, incandescent lamps in a traditional light socket. Fluorescent lamps like the tube, so they have higher efficiencies for sure. This makes sense why you see them in most, major public buildings. Fluorescent lamps are usually the standard right now. If you've ever seen lights like this, these yellow colored lights, this is an example of high pressure sodium being used, and these have a yellow hue to them, but they're very efficient. So there's a good reason to use them as street lights. If you're not as concerned about about how your sweater looks under it and just making sure that you can see if there's a tire in the road, then that's a nice energy efficient solution. Increasingly, we're seeing street lamps, though, are also going to LEDs and even more advanced, sorts of light methods. So you got to consider, what does the color of the light look like? That does matter, but efficiency matters, as well. So you can factor all those in there. Yes, these are improving rapidly. All right, where do we place our lights? Okay, so in general, you want a certain level of illumination in your space so you can see across that space, you can walk across that space, you can see where there are objects you don't want to run into in that space. But you don't want the whole room to be as bright as the workplace. That would be very costly, and it would also make the workplace difficult to see from a contrast standpoint. You still want the lights and the darks. You want that differentiation. So supplement things. Instead of lighting the whole place, get those desk lamps, get a flashlight if you need to. It's a much more effective way to illuminate. It's a much more efficient way, I should say, to illuminate things. Keep in mind that if you have a light source that is for general illumination and you have a luminous display like a TV, you don't want to mix the directions of those two. So you can imagine if I'm trying to watch a movie here and I also had my major room light, it was like right here on the ceiling. Then as I'm sitting in this on my couch here trying to watch a movie, I don't get that nice contrast between lights and darks like I would if the light source was behind me. Okay. Also, we don't want, I'm sorry, if the source is also behind me and that light strikes the TV screen, as well as the light is being emitted out of the TV screen, the light striking it is competing with the emitted light for my imagery. So you don't want light behind you either. Generally, you want this to be as different from the background as possible to make it maximally visible. Okay. All right. So this is also, I like this. We have this on our TV. We have a illuminating LED strip behind it, and it creates this kind of, it illuminates the space around the TV, but without shining light in a way that interferes with my visual experience of the TV. All right, good. Now, one more cool thing. So this is a human factor, a human phenomenon. We call it phototropism, and it describes kind of the human tendency to want to go outside when you're working, in an office. So it is the longing look out the window. No, I'm joking, but humans have an inherent instinctual interest in light. So given a visual experience, wherever the most light is tends to be a biasing, maybe that's the most interesting thing I should be exploring. So there is this tendency where in a subconscious level, if you have a bright light source like a window, usually that's brighter than everything else inside, that's within your field of view in your workplace, it is going to draw some attention away. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes it's good to have a positive distraction. It's always, there are positive psychological benefits to having a view of outside that I can go into in office hours. It's pretty neat. But this phenomenon, if you're talking about where are the light sources, realize that bright lights, they tend to be attractive of human visual systems. All right. Okay, so last on this subtopic, we're going to talk about luminaires, and these are, basically fixtures and light elements that you can get to illuminate a space. And so they combine a light source with reflective properties of, the material that encases that light source. So just a little bit of terminology here. When I say a lamp, that's the light emitting element. The fixture is the surrounding elements, and everything together is the luminaire. Okay, so this is a sketch of some common luminaires, but I've also got some picture examples here. So this would be an example of something we call luminous ceiling. I guess that's what's depicted here. So you have several light sources, and then you have a diffusing grate that is transmitting the light through, but also diffusing it. So it's spreading out that light, so it's a little softer, and that's why the whole panel appears to be illuminated as opposed to the individual bulbs or tubes that are behind it. Yep, there's our diffusing panels, right? So if you got some sort of texture to them, that's one of the ways that the panels diffuse the light. A globe, and you'll notice this is like a frosted globe, so you can almost see the light element inside. But by frosting this creates a diffusing surface in a spherical shape. The light obviously is emitted in all directions here, and it softens the light that way. Dish like this, so you may this always reminds me of my grandmother's house. She had one of these, and so yeah, this is, again, there's a bulb in the middle there, and the light is softened and spread a little bit more through the dish. Direct lighting, of course, we talked about that, and you'll notice also that the elements inside here are here. This is a good, where is it? I don't know which one of these, probably one of these, but the light that goes in all directions, right? And the light that goes up is kind of just being absorbed by the mechanics, the hardware of this luminaire. And so we have to think a little bit about, well, what if we had reflective properties inside this luminaire that would direct more of that light in this direction, as opposed to the light going up, which doesn't do us any good if it just gets absorbed, right? So direct lighting, indirect lighting, we talked. This is an example of something they call hooded lighting. So it's kind of like we've got direct lighting, but we don't want it, so we can cover it when we need to, and we can still get sort of environmental lighting that way. Okay, now this, all right, this is the big one. I will probably ask about this in a quiz and or exam. A parabolic reflector. And a lot of times you would see these with street lamps or very, like spotlight sorts of lamps. These are designed, they have a shape to them, a parabola, such that when you have a roughly, it's not really spherical, but close to spherical emitting light source, like a bulb here. Now this is designed to basically have the majority of the light that's being emitted in all directions is reflected downward. So let me draw this carefully. Let me draw it with a good color too. I need yellow. All right, so this light's good, right? This going straight down. But look at this. So then it's kind of like the shape of the parabola is just so at each, sort of contact point for the beams of light, so that the majority of the light, and let me just say, I'll just talk about this theoretically. Let's say we have a perfect reflective surface and a perfect parabola. Then in theory, we can say, rather than there's the total luminous flux, there's energy in all directions. And now what is that energy in one steradian? I remember the relationship between those two is 4 pi. There's 4 pi steradians in a sphere. So if you give me luminous intensity, which is how much energy is going in my direction, and I can say, okay, well, that's whatever the lumens are in that light source per steradian. Well, if I take all of the lumens, if I take 4 pi worth of lumens, the whole shebang, if I put my hands around it, and I'm getting sunburned on my hands, right? The whole thing, and I take all of that energy and direct it all in one direction. Now, we've taken the total luminous flux, lumens in all directions, and we've effectively made them all of those lumens going in one steradian direction. So we amplify, in effect, we take the brightness of whatever this bulb would be if it was bare, and we multiply that brightness roughly by 4 pi. So that is the factor. Again, this is a theoretical thing. You'd have to have really perfect reflectivity, but I will probably ask you about this question in terms of theoretically. Okay. All right. All right, last slide. Here we go. Okay. Yep. Go. Yep. All right, so a couple of extra resources. And again, this is the last slide on this topic. So if this is interesting to you, if you want to explore it further, you know, for your semester project, for example, a couple of other things you can check out. Of course, we've already looked at military standard 1472H. There are standard books that go with things like photography and like copy. Like I remember Xerox, Kodak. They've had standards as well. Lighting, for workplace applications, you can find them here. So General Electric, the FHWA. This would be the sorts of requirements for roadway illuminations. All right, and that's it for illumination in the workplace. See you next time.